Could Britain be doing more to stop the brutal civil war in Sudan? It's being called a genocide, with tens of thousands of civilians slaughtered in the most recent escalation in the Western Darfur region.
Literally, the earth stained with blood at such a level that it can be seen from space.
The country's ambassador to the UK says the international community has been turning a blind eye to the conflict. So how could the fighting be stopped? I'm Lucy Watson, and this is what you need to know. Joining me is our international editor, Emma Murphy. Now, Emma, this war has been going on for like 2.5 years now, but the last couple of weeks, it's really escalated horrifically. What has happened in Al-Fashir, this major city in Darfur?
Yeah, so Al-Fashir is one of the key strategic cities in Darfur. It fell in the past week or so, and it fell to the Rapid Support Forces, who are they are the paramilitary group that are fighting against the Sudanese armed forces. And the way they took control was through incredibly heavy attacks, starving the population, but also the Sudanese armed forces withdrew, and that allowed the RSF to move forward and take full control. As a result of that, there has been huge displacement of the population and also a monumental amount of death and atrocities that are shocking even by the standards of warfare that we have come to know across the world. And, just the fact that in one of the hospitals last week, both patients, doctors, and families, and anybody else who was in that building were just slaughtered all the time being filmed. It gives you some indication of the level of barbarity of what's going on there. In terms of how many have died in the past days, well, it's difficult at this point to identify exactly. Across the whole conflict, the estimates are 150,000 dead, 14 million displaced. In terms of this last week, there's a thought that, you know, it could be running into the high tens of thousands. 60,000 people were known to have left El Fasher. Only around 10,000 have arrived at the camps, and the concern is what has happened to those people who are not accounted for between leaving and arriving anywhere else. And when you hear the testimony of those who have left, who have actually survived the journey, it's clear that all the way along their route away from El Fasher, there was relentless attack, there was murder, there was kidnap, there was sexual assaults, there was extortion. Over the past days, there have been satellite images released, which, they show literally the earth stained with blood as a result of this war at such a level that it can be seen from space. And that is
It's incomprehensible. Are we talking about a genocide?
Well, the United States acknowledged genocide back in January of this year. In terms of there being a formal legal ruling, no, there hasn't been, and that is necessary for genocide to be internationally acknowledged. I think that the testimonies that are coming out of Sudan, the images, the videos posted by certainly the RSF would lean towards that. And in many ways, the name or the branding that is put on what is going on there is not the thing that is the most important to the people who are trying to survive it. They know that they are being brutalized, that they are losing family members, that they are suffering the most horrific degradations, the most horrific tortures. What it's called in some ways doesn't actually matter. What's going to be done about it is what really matters. And when you listen to those people who've made the journey out of El Fasher, the majority of whom are female voices, because many of the men did not make that journey and survive it, what is striking is how many speak of who they lost on the way. And small detail that stands out so clearly. One woman spoke of the fact that when they were walking, as they made progress along the road away from Al-Fasher, they were stopped by the RSF. Everybody was searched for money, for phones, for gold, for jewellery. Even the babies' nappies were torn open and searched.
Now, reporting on it, I mean, like we just talked about, it's been going on for 2.5 years. It's seldom been in the news on a weekly basis. I've talked about it once on this podcast. What is it? Are we now talking about it because the numbers are so huge, because the situation is so dire? Or is it because, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, have actually put on social media some of the acts of barbarity that they've committed? Why are we suddenly now paying attention when this has been going on for so long, do you think?
I think it's probably a combination of all those issues that you mention, and the fact, particularly, that people are being forced to face what is happening in Sudan because the RSF are filming so much of what they're doing. They are not in any way deterred from being seen to be committing some utterly heinous acts that are being described as war crimes by many. Now, I was with the ambassador, the Sudanese ambassador to the UK just a couple of days ago, and also other members of Sudanese society here. And they were very, very clear in their frustration and their desperation and their anger at how little coverage this war has had, and also in the way that this war has been dealt with by the international community. One of the comments that really struck me was that this was not an unforeseen situation and it was not unstoppable, but it was neither dealt with in advance nor being dealt with now, and no great sign of being dealt with in the future. And until there is a real effort by probably the United States as the only broker who can kind of put the foot on the neck of those who are supplying and fueling this war, um, there isn't going to be a great change. And in terms of, those nations, particularly the United Arab Emirates, which is seen to be supplying weapons to the RSF, that is an accusation that is being regularly levelled at them. It's something that the UAE absolutely denies.
Mm.
But there seems to be a trail that leads to them. And I think that also there are many other countries feeding into this, because the RSF itself is made up of um, mercenaries, volunteers, whatever, from 17 different nations. It is a paramilitary force that is being allowed to fight with incredibly powerful weapons, and weapons that are in good supply from one place or another.
As you say, huge frustration, and you spoke to the ambassador to the UK, Babakir Alamin. Let's have a listen to what he had to say to you.
The major international player haven't taken that seriously.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, because the priorities, maybe they have other priorities. They have other, they give priority for their maybe their interest, their maybe the commercial interest with the countries that supported the militia. Maybe they are busy with other issues. Maybe they take us for granted. I don't know.
So he mentioned their commercial interests. What's he getting at?
Well, he's getting at those geopolitical global relations, those relations between governments and powerful backers. So, in particular, from a UK point of view, the UK is not going to want to compromise its relationship with the United Arab Emirates. And that is something that we've seen over and over again in so many of the conflicts in the region and wider. Commercial interests, political interests, they all a part to play in this. And whilst there can be horror expressed and condemnation at what's being done to a civilian population, there is a very significant calculation then made as to whether to go further than that, and how far what can be achieved by going further, and what the damage is potentially of going further to national interest.
What he also talked to you about was that not only is this contained within Sudan, but the problem could reach beyond that and be a threat to global security. How could it do that?
Well, if you think that Sudan is a huge geographical space. It has a massive coastline, and it's geopolitically very, very significant in terms of where it's located. You know, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, the Red Sea. A collapse would threaten so many things. So let's think about what they might be. Global stability and security, a fragmented Libya-style Sudan, a country of that size, with that scale of population, size of population, would be a really very destabilizing nation in the middle of that region. You've then got the issue of regional borders, of migration corridors, of counter-terror cooperation, energy routes, food supply. And let's not forget that a people under huge attack, a people living in a country that doesn't seem to offer any future, are likely to be a people on the move. And so there would be a significant increase in migration. And that at the moment is something that is of huge political concern to governments across the world, but most particularly in the West at the moment. There is real concern about that. And so a fragmented or fallen Sudan has the consequence to have huge regional and global consequences.
Just before I ask you about what on earth can be done, can you just, I suppose, explain a little bit, the opposing sides and how we're actually got to this level of conflict?
So, in terms of Sudan, it slightly simplifies the history to say that it is a country that has been run very much by army generals.
Mhm.
But that is a very strong theme in its history. There have also been a number of coups. Now, in 2019, the government of President Bashar Omar was brought down by a coup. And at that point, there was the instigation of a civilian and a military government. And it's important to say that civil society in Sudan, particularly female civil society in Sudan, is incredibly strong. And that brought about this change in governance. However, there was then a falling apart of that civilian and military rule, and a military government took over. And the two generals that we were dealing with there was General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan and his deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti. And they took over governance and then fell out. And that is what's led us to where we are now. Because Hamdan is leading the south, the Sudanese armed forces, and Hemedti is leading the RSF. And so, really, this is a war that is being led by two men who used to be allies that are now adversaries and are waging a most brutal battle on the land of their country.
What does happen next? Because presumably
I think it would be almost impossible for the RSF to control Sudan. It's far too big. They don't have that capacity. They're more of a, a paramilitary group than an army that would take over in the traditional sense. In terms of the longer term, I think we will potentially see the US try and instigate some kind of ceasefire. And I use the word ceasefire advisedly, certainly not a peace plan. I think it will be that way that we've seen so often recently, where the US puts pressure on, they bring in the regional allies, they manage to somehow bring a pause to the fighting to try and get some humanitarian aid and support in. But that is not a peace plan. That is not how to deal with the longer term issues. That would also give both sides a chance to consolidate. And I think there's not a great appetite by either side for that, though there might be a desperation for it from
yeah, it very much seems they
humanitarian
want to
point of view.
continue.
Yeah, I think they are keen to continue. They don't want to allow the other side to gather themselves, and they want to push forward. But in reality, there is no great victory for either of them. This is going to just be a continual backwards and forwards. It's unlikely that there will be any great success in terms of governance of Sudan for the RSF. I think where we might see is that there will be other areas that are targeted quite significantly in the coming months and weeks. And that is another source of great concern to the international aid community, certainly, because they are trying to deal with the fallout of this. And they're already struggling, to put it very basically. It's a huge battle, and getting aid in is incredibly difficult. And really, humanitarian aid in this war has now been weaponized, and that is the worst possible consequence for the population.
What does it take for Western intervention of the level that's needed for the Sudanese people and the UK? What are we doing?
It obviously takes a huge amount because it's not actually happened at this point, and I think it won't happen. I think there will be attempts by governments to try and settle the situation a little bit. We've got the UK calling for a meeting of the UN Human Rights Council, or having that meeting next Wednesday to try and discuss how they move forward, how they deal with this situation. But the reality is, until there is great pressure brought to bear regionally of the backers of the Sudanese armed forces, of the backers of the RSF, until that pressure is brought to bear on those who are funding, fueling, and arming this war, it will not be brought to any kind of conclusion, and even a ceasefire will be difficult to achieve in those circumstances.
Emma, thank you very much indeed for your analysis, as always. Well, for all our latest reporting and analysis, head to itv.com/news and follow ITV News on YouTube. Until our next quick briefing, thank you very much for joining us.